Hey everybody, and welcome to Anime for Life. Well, today is going to be a rather interesting video, and it's going to possibly be very controversial, but I figured I'd have to make this because Twitter has once again shown its stupidity, and it's I've gotten to my wits' end with the crap, and it's basically they are now going after Markiplier, and they are calling him a white supremacist and a Nazi. And this is the person that's doing it. They're called Katie, and they say, before you ask, no, Mark didn't say or do anything anti Semitic or racist. However, he proudly associates himself with PewDiePie. You have two people in the room, and one of them is a Nazi. You have two Nazis in a room. So technically, they're saying he's guilty by association because PewDiePie apparently is the true Nazi. Idols only exist to uphold the status quo, support queer creators, support Jewish creators, don't support Nazi creators. So let's just say PewDiePie truly was a Nazi. We all know he's not, but let's just shits and giggles say he was. Apparently, just sitting in a room with one that just happens to be there makes you one. That's like saying because my dad, let's say, knows I like anime, that makes him an anime fan. Even though he has absolutely no interest. I tried talking to him about it. He'll be like, yeah, whatever. Sure, great. But no, just because he knows I like it, that makes him a fan. Like, it sounds dumb, doesn't it? But it's because of that I've decided, you know what? Let's give these people a history lesson. And make it a really, really ironic one, too. Because if they want to preach about Nazis and throw that word around so much, I'm going to do something that's out of the ordinary, and I'm going to do a quick little history lesson and tell them about two genuine, bona fide, 100% Nazis. But they're good Nazis. And they actually have gone down in history as heroes. And you might be thinking, what? They're Nazis and they're considered heroes? That's impossible. Like, we all know what the Nazis did and the atrocities they did. There is no way that these guys could be considered heroes. Which is why I am going to educate you right now. And this is the first. Karl Plage. I hope I pronounced that right. And Karl Plage was part of the Nazi Party, and I think he was part of the Wachtmacht, if I pronounce that right. I am not German. I do not speak German at all, or very, very, very little. So my pronunciations are likely completely off. But anyway, he ran eventually a forced labor camp because his original goal was to actually help the Jewish population because he did not agree with what was going on with the Holocaust at all. He did not agree with it. He became disillusioned with it. And so he decided to actually hide the Jewish community as best he could, or employ them in his businesses, or any such other manner, so that he would have an excuse to say, no, we can't do this because, if you, throw him to the gulag or the chambers, you're going to hurt my business. You're going to throw me out of my livelihood. right? So that gave him an excuse to make it so they couldn't. But eventually he knew this was only going to go so far. And so eventually he said, you know what? Fine, let's make the labor camp. Let's make that evil concentration camp thingy and force them hard labor, etc., etc., etc. And so it made it look like he's getting on board with all this, when in reality he's now actually making these underground tunnels and housing for them to hide them. And if I'm remembering correctly, this forced labor, he was actually paying them the entire time. So it wasn't forced labor, it was actually just a job. But it was all under this guise to make it look like he was on board this entire time when he wasn't. And in the end of it, he saved thousands upon thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of people possibly by the end of it. And he actually got an award posthumously, an Ally of the Nations, I believe it was called, for his actions in the war, despite being a bona fide Nazi. So there were good ones. Very, very, very few. But he's an example. Like, probably of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands, you'd have one in, if there, let's say 500,000, you have one in 100,000. But he proves there was at least one. Next of the two, John Rabe. Again, I hope I pronounce that right. I don't know if it's Rabe or Rabe. I pronounce it Rabe. But anyway, he lived in China. And although he was a Nazi supporter, there is conflicting arguments that he may not have known what was actually going on in Germany, because the majority of his adult life he was living in China, because he loved China so much. He loved the people, he loved the place that he lived in, so he just decided to mostly just live there. So he didn't really have any form of contact with Germany at the time. He knew there was a war, but that's about it. Whereas others say no, he probably did know what was going on. But anyway, he set up a no-fire zone in China when the Japanese atrocities started happening and the Japanese attacked China and Pearl Harbor, etc., etc., etc. And so when they really pushed into China and they were going on their massacres, he put up a zone where anybody inside this zone, it was a safe space. You were not allowed to have any form of violence or discord or anything. Otherwise, you are kicked out of this zone. And he would actually use his position from the Nazi Party to enforce these rules, because despite the atrocities Hitler did, there was a lot of power that he held because of it. And so he would use that to his advantage. And he would shove that right in their faces if they got in started causing ruckuses, and they tried to, make an excuses why they were doing this or get in his face or backtalk, and he'd just shove it in their face and say, hey, I'm the boss here. I'll go straight to, the Fuhrer himself if I have to. And once he made those kind of threats, he'd be like, oh, shit, right? He could kick me out, and now I'm going to be in a way worse situation. And generally, they'd back off. And in the end of the war, he went back to Germany, and, a lot of people did. They did not like him just because of his associations. And so he didn't live the best lifestyle for a while. But once Beijing and China got word of his plight, because he basically used up all his savings. He had to sell his beloved China art collection just to make ends meet. So once China got this word of his plight, they raised the equivalency of today's money, and this was a few years ago, back from the Wikipedia article, $23,000 in today's funds to send to him to help him survive. So he was very, very beloved. And in the end, I believe all charges against him were dropped. So again, there's a second example of a good Nazi, and one who had no support or dealings in the atrocities of what the general consensus and what almost everybody can agree was a horrific action from a group of people, and we all wish would burn in hell. And then there's also the story of a Nazi officer who was a very bad person, but at least had the tiniest amount of morals when he was sent to Paris and the Germans were being pushed out. And when they were pushed out, he says, you know what, raze it to the ground, leave nothing behind. But when he was doing this, he got to Notre Dame. And everybody knows how beautiful this Notre Dame is, and how the world mourned when they found out it was in flames that couple years back. And even he, when he got to Notre Dame and he had the bombs all in place and ready to go, he's like, I can't do it. I cannot destroy this place. And it was the Eiffel Tower as well. He couldn't do it. So even he had the morals to not destroy that place, where I'll bet you anything that the people on Twitter could find something about Notre Dame and Eiffel Tower where they could love to see them burned to the ground for some stupid reason of it freaking perpetuating racism or sexism or something. Right? Although that story is not verified from what I could find. But a lot of people know it and are proud of that story. So whether it's actually true or not, nobody knows. I've heard it many times and I think it's true. I'd like to think it's true, but there's no true evidence behind it to truly back it up. And I said true a lot there. But anyway, those are two true examples of Nazi supporters or actual Nazis who did good for the world and had charges dropped against them and are actually remembered fondly by everybody among the general consensus of actual people. So I find it hilarious how these people throw the word around loosely so easily to people that don't deserve it. And yet, here's two people, two true Nazis, 100%, and they still act better than people on Twitter, who apparently aren't, despite acting way worse than general bona fide Nazis that I've just listed. So I hope Twitter thinks long and hard about this and takes comfort in the fact that, you know what, the next time they call somebody a Nazi, just, I hope they think that, sure, they may be a genuine bona fide Nazi, and yet they may still be a better person than that Twitter user. So, with that in mind, keep enjoying anime, and anime for life.